Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Breakdown. We're going to be looking at the Sunday school lesson for May 11th. This will be covering 2 Corinthians 11, 16 through 33, and the title of this lesson is called Perseverance. As we're getting into the lesson, one of the questions that it asks is, have you ever participated in an athletic competition, taken an exam, or performed some other important role while dealing with an injury or illness? Has that ever happened to you at some point in life, Cody?
Yeah. Let's see here. Baseball in high school, going into college, I threw my arm out. It was totally done, and figured out at 19 I was just not a good player, so I was going to be a coach. And that didn't last long. But I loved it while I was coaching. I just chose to do different things.
Yeah.
But perseverance through that, it was kind of weird because that was at a time when I really just didn't care. So it was really before I really gave my life to Christ. So it was like, yeah, whatever. If I never use my arm again, it's fine. But I see things differently now. Like, I don't know. I think if we're honest with ourselves, family and things like that change things. Like now, if I get hurt or hurt myself, it's like, man, now I can't play with Walter, or now I can't do things with my wife. So I think a lot of that has to do with how you persevere too, is the people you put around you too.
Yeah. So my junior year of college, in preseason, I messed up my knee. 2 weeks later, after I'd played our first game, we were in practice, and I finished tearing my ACL completely. And so the rest of my junior season, I got to ride the Pine Pony and watch the team, and I was still part of the team. I went to all the practices. I showed up. I went to all the games, but I couldn't do anything. And so that was difficult to persevere through that. And then, of course, the next year, after I'd had surgery, I'd recovered. I was back playing again, but experienced a lot of pain. My ability to cut was gone, or severely hampered compared to what it used to be. I wasn't as fast. All of those things, man, especially with the knee pain that I was experiencing every day after practice, that was tough. But I pushed through. Didn't feel like I was ever as good as I was, at least during college. I felt like it took me 2 to 3 years to fully recover. But that was just a lot of perseverance through all of that. So Paul is talking about just some of the things that he has persevered through as an apostle. And that's what the lesson is getting into about perseverance. But I want to look at just some of these verses. We don't have time to read through all of them. But I wanted to read definitely this first part of chapter 16. And he says this. He says, "I repeat, let no one consider me a fool. But if you do, at least accept me as a fool, so that I can also boast a little. What I'm saying in this matter of boasting, I don't speak as the Lord would, but as it were foolishly, since many boast according to the flesh, I will also boast. For you being so wise, gladly put up with fools. In fact, you put up with it if someone enslaves you, if someone exploits you, if someone takes advantage of you, if someone is arrogant toward you, if someone slaps you in the face. I say this to our shame. We have been too weak for that." So Paul is going through, and he's at the beginning of chapter 11 is talking about false teachers coming in, how they have these super apostles that have come into the church of Corinth, and they are basically saying that Paul is not a good apostle. They're better than he is. And so he's going through and said, hey, I'm going to act like a fool. Consider me a fool because I'm defending myself and demonstrating what I've been through. So that's why he's saying, consider me a fool. Let no one consider me a fool, but if you do, accept me as a fool so I can boast a little. So he's saying, let me boast and you can consider me to be a fool. So he's going through and he's starting his defense of the things that he's been through and confirming that he is an apostle and is doing so in a way that is letting the church at Corinth know that what he says is legitimate and what the other people are saying is not legitimate.
Yeah, and the question that it asks after this reading in our Bible study says, what kind of experiences could Paul have listed on his resume as dealing with this? we've kind of went through a lot of Paul's letters to the churches already, and the list is long as far as things that he's dealt with here that talk about perseverance and how he perseveres through that. And I just think it's so funny that if he's like, if you call me a fool, please label me that way, but at least let me come in and act like one. Like, let me be who you say I am. Let me be who I say I am. Like, if I am a fool, then let me be that. I think that's the perseverance side of Paul. Like, if that's who I am, then I'm going to be that person 100%. Like, I'm not going to be this person and then you say I'm something else. I want to be exactly who you say I am. And I think with whoever was calling Paul a fool at this time, I think he's just really kind of pushing it back at them. Like, where do you see the foolishness? Because if it's me giving my life for Christ, then call it foolishness.
Yep.
I am a fool.
Yeah.
And I dare you to follow like me.
No, it's really interesting. They're basically coming through and saying, look, we are more of God's servants than Paul is. But Paul is now going to go through his resume, and he's already done it to some extent in previous chapters, and basically said, look, here's what I've done. Here's how I've suffered. He's pointing and demonstrating the proof that he is more of a servant of God than these quote unquote super apostles ever were. And that's just demonstrating who he was, of saying, look, I've got to defend myself, because if I don't, you guys are going to be led astray by these other people. I don't want to defend myself, but to make sure that you're not being led astray by these others, these false teachers that have come in, I've got to prove that what I'm saying is true, that I am truly the guy that I say I am, not what these other guys say. And he doesn't want to defend himself, but he knows that if he doesn't, then he's just opening up the door and letting these people come in and not doing anything to keep them out. And so he's got to make sure he's keeping them out.
Yeah, and I think it's so key here too. A lot of people, when they read Paul's letters, they say, man, he was just all about himself. Like, he speaks highly of himself. And if you really look at the context and what he says to people, what he's saying to them is not something that builds him up in that community.
No.
Like, it's like we see it as being braggadocious in our view, because we're Christians and we're like, man, he sure is telling them that he's this great guy.
Yeah.
But what they don't realize is, in the context of his time, he was really saying that he was a person that people hated.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that was actually bragging on himself. He was like, no, I am this person. I am the person that people hate. I am the person that doesn't want to be seen come down the road. I'm the name you don't want to see in the mailbox. Like, when you're opening my letter, you're fixing to get a spanking. So, I mean, the fact that he's bragging about that, and he's really not even bragging. He's just saying, look, in Christ, this is who I am, and I'm not ashamed of it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to persevere to be that person, because that's what God's called me to be.
Yeah.
And I think out of all of the founders of the disciples that we see, outside of Peter, and really Paul did a better job than Peter did about really just putting his foot down and like, this is who I am, because even Paul had to correct Peter. And Peter was acting differently from the Gentiles and the Jews, and Paul was like, look, if you're going to persevere as this disciple of the disciples and you're the cornerstone, then act like it. Like, nobody is treated differently. And for Paul to kind of step in and do that and correct Peter, that just tells you the testament. And that was early on in Paul's ministry. I mean, that was before Paul really had his momentum behind him. And I think that's a testament to the perseverance that Paul had, is the fact that he wasn't afraid to correct anybody. He was also not afraid to be who he is.
Yeah. And going back to what you were talking about earlier about the things that Paul went through was not making him loved by people. Like, it actually demonstrated that people did not like him. I mean, just think about all he goes through, and he lists out some things here starting in 23. But he says, I've been with far more labors, many more imprisonments, far worse beatings, many times near death. He was beaten with 40 lashes, minus one, 5 times from the Jews. He's been beaten with rods. He's been stoned, apparently to death at one point, and God brought him back to life. He was shipwrecked 3 times. He's been out in the open sea floating night and day. He's been facing dangers from rivers, robbers. his own people. I mean, you just keep going through all of this section, and he has just been through the ringer multiple times, and he's bragging about it because he's trying to point to the fact that what he's going through is legitimate, because he's not doing it to promote himself. He's doing it to promote the gospel.
Yeah.
And if he were like these super apostles that are coming in they're bringing a false gospel, he's basically saying, what have they been through? They haven't been through anything. Like, look what I've done for the gospel. I put my life on the line. I've not asked any money from you. We see that in previous parts of 2 Corinthians. Like, I didn't come asking you for money. I actually robbed the Macedonians who were poor and took their money to support the ministry that I was doing here. Like, I've never taken a penny from you guys, and you're going to accuse me of like being lesser than these other guys, of their gospel is more important and more true than the real gospel.
Right.
You guys are nuts is basically what he's saying.
Well, and another thing I love about this, and is we go back a couple weeks when Paul was talking about how he was kind of get on the church for not paying people like him, and helping people like him and Barnabas who didn't have families. It's just kind of comical to me to see, like, 3 weeks later, fast forward through the reading plan, and he's now saying, look, I've done all this by myself.
Mhm.
None of you have helped me.
No.
The money I've actually taken, I've poured back into you guys.
Yep.
So, number one, take that. But number two, how much more do you need to start actually doing what God's called you to do? Because I'm persevering in poverty, and you guys are so well off, and you're not even trying to persevere.
There's a really strong connection, I think, to like churches around the world today, especially American churches versus not American churches. Like we see any kind of suffering as, oh man, that's so difficult. And, third world countries or places where the gospel is not legal, they go through that every day, and they're like, what's the big deal? Like, it's normal, you know? And I think we have, there's a lot of things that the American church has in very close commonality with the church at Corinth, just in the way that we are operating. In some instances, that is probably wrong, and we need to be more like what Paul is talking about. We need to make sure we're not letting false doctrines come in, and making sure that we are teaching correctly. We're seeing that, hey, people are suffering for the gospel. There's just a lot of things like that we have a lot in commonality. So that the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians really points the finger at us a lot, because we, in a lot of ways, and I'm not saying Mount Vernon, but the American church in general, maybe there's some things here. There's a lot of things that the American church does that sure looks a lot like the Church of Corinth,
Oh, I mean, I would even say that there are parts of Mount Vernon that look that way. You think Corinthians were very wealthy and very healthy as far as funds go, and as far as the culture was. And I think you're right. The American church as a whole, we have this snobby presence of, we get what we want. We don't normally need much. I mean, it used to be that when we did things like this, and the church was doing ministry, there were fundraisers, there were daycares, there were ways that people went around getting funds to do mission work. You would have potlucks, you would have cake sales, you would have yard sales. Well, you don't see that anymore. And it's because the church is so well off financially that we essentially can do that from the inside.
Yeah.
But I think a big point here, and what really we saw last week when we talked about Macedonian churches helping Corinthian church, we don't really think about the financial side of things until it's a problem. And I think the issue is just like Paul said, look, this church is so poor, but they're giving everything they have to help you. And then it spurred the Corinthian church to help other churches. And we kind of talked about it in our D group last week of, like, what if the churches now in America did that? Like, what if we took our excess funding and pushed it to another church to help them start financially? What if we took it and helped a mission team out of the other church that did something? Because that's really what Paul was striving for the churches to do. These churches weren't very close together. They were hundreds of miles apart, and they were still sending money to help each other. And here in America, we've got churches that are literally blocks away, and they've put fences up. So it's like, how do you persevere in that? Like, where's the persevering in bringing the gospel to the nation if we're going to put fences up and not share what God has given us?
It really points to the fact that it's a heart matter. It's a cheerful giving issue, where we are willing to be more like the Macedonian church, where they have nothing, but man, they're giving everything.
Yeah.
They're cheerful givers of what they've got. Whereas kind of the flip side, that's why Paul's writing to him, be like, hey, you promised this, and the Macedonians want to come see it, so don't make me a liar now.
Right.
Come on, let's make sure you're getting it done, because he knew they were. No, I guess their heart probably wasn't as much in it as it should have been, and so
And I think he knew that.
Oh, absolutely, and that's why he writes that part in the letter. Like, hey, make sure you're getting everything done, so it doesn't make me look like a liar when I show up. And make you look bad too, because I've been bragging about you to all the churches in Macedonia.
Right.
But it definitely points to the fact that it's a hard issue.
That brings me to an image question of how Paul did that. Like, look, don't make me look like a liar. I've been bragging on you. Last night we were, Walter's had a little crud, and we were giving him a breathing treatment. Well, my mom was over, and my mom was helping do that. And I was like, man, he's been so good the last couple of days. He just sticks his face in it, and he does what he's supposed to. And the minute that thing cuts on, he rips the mask off, throws it across the room, and then just looks at her like, I'm not doing that.
That's
You're not
going
to put that on my face. And then I was like, the minute I said you do good with that, you're going to make me look stupid.
Yeah.
And I just see Paul in this moment like, look,
We
are on the boat right now. You better have this stuff ready when I get there.
28 and 29 says, not to mention other things, there is a daily pressure on me, my concern for all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to stumble, and I do not burn with indignation? If boasting is necessary, I will boast about my weaknesses. And he's going through, and he's basically just saying, look, in all of this, my concern is for the churches. I want to see the churches grow and be strong in their faith. I have pressure on me because I have deep concerns for churches to make sure that they're growing in their faith, and that they're going to be faithful to God, that they're going to be obedient to what he's called them to. And that is another reason that he is a real apostle and these other ones aren't, because these super apostles that he's talking about that are bringing false doctrines, false teachings, they're promoting themselves. Paul's not concerned about promoting himself. He's embarrassed that he has to say all the things that he's gone through, and basically pat himself on the back a little bit, saying, look, this is all the stuff I've been through. But he's saying, look, they're doing that for their own concern, but I'm going through all of this, and still my biggest concern is not survival of all these things that I've been through, but my biggest concern is that the churches are growing.
Yeah.
Like, guys, I'm the real deal. Like, what I've taught you is the real deal.
Yeah. And I think, and this is just me being me, if we think about the discipleship of Paul and versus the other disciples that these people are comparing him to, these other people watched Jesus walk, did the 3 years with Jesus, learning from him, and Paul got this crash course within about 6 months of Jesus teaching him how to do these things while he was impaired. And I think a lot of that is the perseverance Paul has, is because he had to do that. Like, he didn't get the honor and privilege of walking behind Jesus and seeing him do all these miracles. He really only got to see Jesus's ministry towards the end when he started persecuting Christians.
Yeah.
And really, I don't know, I almost have like more of respect for Paul here, because he's coming from a place where he was not only stricken down by somebody he couldn't even see, but then he was taught all these things without that person there. And now he's saying, look, I'm going to teach people this. And it brings me to that verse where it's like, for you that have seen, blessed are you who've seen, but even more so are you that are not seeing and still believing. That's Paul. Like, he didn't see Jesus physically, yet he believes because the things that happened in his life. And I just think, like, he's sitting there looking like, this is why I'm better than them.
Yeah.
Because they got to watch him for 3 years and know him physically and personally and have that relationship. And here I stand, not ever meeting the man, not ever getting to see the God that created me. And yet I'm standing here fighting tooth and nail to make sure you guys believe in him.
Yep.
And you're telling me that I'm a fool.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just imagine the slap in the face that is to Paul. But I mean, Paul ain't no wimp. He spent more of his ministry in chains and being beaten than he did in a happy place
Yeah.
to where he was writing letters. So I mean, he's not one of those that wears his heart on his sleeve,
No.
but he's also not afraid to share his feelings.
Yep, that's true. Kind of closing up this section, verse 30 says, if boasting is necessary, I'll boast about my weaknesses. And the lesson alludes to this pretty well, but I think it's really interesting that Paul, when he was living under Jewish authority and was, the Hebrew of Hebrews, he was trying to earn favor with God in everything that he was doing. And he was wanting to live in such a way that it would bring favor to God. And it's just funny that, after he's saved, what would have been a check mark on his resume, a bunch of check marks on his resume of, look what I've been through, look what I've done for God, look at this. And he could have used that before his salvation as tick marks of saying, look how good of a Hebrew man I am, or look how well I'm serving God. He doesn't use that anymore. He understands that his things that he's been through are not check marks. They're not approval of God. No, what he needs to do is point everything to God. And he's not going to boast about those things, about what he's done. He's going to boast about his weaknesses.
Yeah.
And he's going to boast about what God has done and given him the strength to overcome, not of his own accord, but because of who God is. Yeah. And I think that's just a crazy thing. And then he finishes off, telling the story in Damascus when he's let down in a basket through a window to basically save his life. But it all goes back to how God is doing the work. He's just being obedient. He's doing what God's called him to do. But God has allowed him to persevere through all of this to continue to be concerned about the ministry and how the churches are growing in their faith.
And I just see this double side here of what you just said. Paul came from being the Hebrew of Hebrews, who was more concerned about doing everything he could to prove that he was worthy of God, to now he's in a position where he is doing everything he can to point to God by what he can't do well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a story for all of us. Like, what are you doing in your life that you're pointing to God? Is it just the things you do good? Because that's not about God. That's about you. If you're allowing your weaknesses and things that you don't do well to point to God too, that's the life sacrifice that God wants.
Yep.
And we see that in Paul perfectly. Like, look, if I'm going to boast in anything, I'm going to boast in my weaknesses. He could turn around and boast about all the churches he planted. He could turn around and boast about the discipleship he had from God in spirit. Mm-hmm. He could turn around and boast about all of the laws that he had helped uphold for years to keep the faith. But he doesn't. He talks about his weaknesses as in, like, I come to you in meekness because I'm just upset about what you guys are doing. I planted you guys, and I guess I didn't lead you well. But here's another letter of me trying to fix that. It's just amazing to watch Paul go back to his weaknesses and say, look, this is really what makes God God. I'm a terrible person. I'm the chief sinner among sinners, and he's using me to help you guide you guys along. Yep. And I just think that's a testament of how we should be and how we should live our lives.
Yeah, I think it's Paul demonstrating how God uses us when we are completely dependent on him. When we are, God gives us strengths and abilities, but not, at least in my life, I've noticed that I've grown more when I'm relying on God for my weaknesses, when I can't do something on my own. And so I need to rely on God, not just, hey, give me the strength to do this, but I can't do this. I don't know what to do. And my faith has grown more in those times, I think, than in others. But I think it also demonstrates to those around me that who God is, more so when I'm in my weaknesses than when I'm in my strengths. And that's something that we have to remember, that God uses probably our weaknesses even more than our strengths, because we're dependent on Him, and we're just having to give it to Him and say, God, I can't do it. You got to do this.
Yeah, and I think that's the amazing part of it, is that we have to.
Mm-hmm.
He's not making us by any means, but if we're truly honest with ourselves, we can't do it, and we have to have His help.
Yep.
We have to have His presence in the situation, and I think that's the key. Like, we have to realize that we have to have Him in those situations, but that's all the time.
Yep.
That there's no time in our life that we don't have to have Him present if we want it to be about Him. We can't just say, oh, no, you can work from home today, Jesus. I'll take care of it here. It's just not how it works.
Yep.
We're not going to put Jesus on a teleconference and say, hey, everything's good here.
Yep.
Just go ahead and take you a few days off. And then we get to Thursday after we've given him a few days off, and we're like, oh my gosh, it's so awful here. You're going to have to work over the weekend to fix this. So a lot of times we do that, and it's not perseverance. A lot of times, and isn't it funny that a lot of times we think we're persevering when we're doing it on our own, and it's a struggle, when really we're not. We're not persevering at all. We're just being disobedient, little spoiled kids.
We're just trying to do it on our own, and pass it off as, I'm struggling so hard.
I think about Walter. Like, we have these little snack cups that have the rubber seals on the top to where you can only get one snack at a time.
Yep.
Well, he gets so mad because his little chubby hand gets stuck in those lids, and he's struggling. And if he would have just waited for Mom to give him the snack, he wouldn't have to struggle. And sometimes we see that as perseverance when it's really not. It's something we shouldn't be doing.
Yep.
The perseverance is actually letting God do stuff that we really didn't want to remove from our lives. That's the perseverance that we're talking about.
Yep.
I just think it's so funny that sometimes we find the struggle, the perseverance, and that's not it.
Yep. Well, we need to persevere, let God handle it, give all the boasting and all the glory to God, and let Him use our weaknesses and our strengths. But man, especially our weaknesses, we gotta have God working in those. And on the flip side of that too, we gotta have the wherewithal to say, God, I know this is technically one of my strengths, but even my strength is not enough to do what you've called me to do. So I've got to rely on you both through my weaknesses and my strengths. But anyway, anything else you want to add to today?
I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of The Breakdown. We look forward to seeing you guys here next week as we discuss next week's Sunday school lesson.